couple of minutes for our numbers to stabilize, and we'll give a start. Excellent. It's almost a minute past the hour. Let's put the slide down so we can see everyone. Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Colleagues, good evening. After a wonderful summer, the evenings are getting dark again. They almost seem to mirror the NHS. Strikes, strikes, strikes. Everywhere you turn. But there is one part of the NHS that is still standing tall. Despite all the challenges with demands, workforce, requirements of what they're required to do, it is the one primary care that stands tall and continues to deliver. The recognition that primary care plays such a significant part in the delivery of the health services is more and more apparent with the latest inclusion in the NHS staff survey of primary care staff. Now that's fantastic. I think it's one of the most welcome developments to be able to capture the views of many of our colleagues who work in primary care practices so that they can then be empowered to support the change that is needed from the NHS. 5 years ago, East London Foundation Trust set up the primary care division. When we set this division up, we were clear that our motivation was to shore up the support for primary care colleagues. Clinically, primary care has some of the most amazing clinicians. But when it comes to being rich in terms of corporate support, the infrastructure support, to ensure the clinicians can do the right things, primary care doesn't have the same level of support. At Elft, we were of the view that by sharing our corporate infrastructure, we could create a more resilient, a more vibrant clinical system to support our residents, but also ensure working in primary care could be made much more joyous. Good evening. I'm Mohit Venkatram. I'm the Executive Director of Primary Care at East London Foundation Trust, and I host the evenings for Primary Care Future, the webinar. The creation of this webinar has been an absolute labor of hard work and love for all of us. I recall the first webinar where we had about 30 colleagues joining us. Today, almost 300 people have registered for this webinar. I can't take much credit because we are very fortunate to have some amazing guests who speak at these webinars. As you know, in these webinars, we always take a moment to reflect on the achievements of primary care over the last month. In the month of August, the data for July was published. Amazingly, in July, despite all the fall in activity everywhere in the NHS, primary care delivered 27.8 million appointments across the country. Now, many of us know primary care has also started delivering appointments through the networks. Not all networks in the country record their activity accurately. But for those that did, slightly over 60%, another 750,000 appointments were delivered in the month of July itself. 43.6% of these appointments, literally half, not quite, but very close, happened on the same day. And while 90% of us did attend the appointments, the GPs themselves did 45% of the appointments, so pretty close to half. One of the data that often is quoted in the newspapers is the fact that these appointments are not face-to-face. In the month of July, almost 70% of the appointments happen face-to-face. Now, that's phenomenal statistics. So despite this amazing achievement, were we all, as residents, happy with the services that were delivered? The one person who can help us understand the construct of the whole national system, the design, how the data of patient survey is captured, how it makes sense, and then converting that data into a form of intelligence so that we can together make a difference to the care that we provide to our residents. I can only imagine the size of intellect that would be needed to run such a complex, efficient system. Today, we are extremely pleased to have the amazing Anna Quigley from Ipsos, who has been running the system so efficiently over the last few years. You just have to Google the name to be exposed to the range of activity that Anna has led on. Anna, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure having you with us on these webinar series. Just before I hand over to you, can I share with our colleagues that please participate actively. Use the Q&A button on your screens to post any questions you may have. When we advertise this session, a number of you have already been sending me your questions. I will be using those questions in addition to the ones you pose. So that's all from me. Without further ado, let me hand over to the amazing Anna, who runs this efficient system. Anna, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and live up to that. That was quite an introduction. I'm just going to share my slides, if you bear with me for a second. And I'm hoping you can see those slides now. Good. Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's really lovely to be with you virtually this evening. As you've just heard, my name's Anna Quigley. I lead the Health and Social Care team at Ipsos. And as part of that role, I act as Quality Director for the GP Patient Survey. So what I'm going to do tonight is spend a little bit of time telling you a bit about the survey, some basic facts about it. What is it? How do we run it? What goes into developing the questionnaire? How can the survey results be used? And then very happy to take questions about it at the end. So first of all, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it, some sort of key facts and figures. So it's now actually entering its 18th year. It was launched in 2006 by the Department of Health, and it was a very different survey then for a very different purpose, actually. But since 2013, it's been commissioned by NHS England. Really important, though, is its governance as well. So one of the really important features of it is the steering group. They are there to make sure that it really reflects the needs of users of primary care, but also those people delivering it as well. So that steering group is made up of like a range of different stakeholders, so representative bodies, so people from RCGP, from BMA, representatives of different ICSs, and patient reps as well, and a real range of people. The purpose of the survey is to provide representative data about patient experience of primary care at practice level. It runs every year, so at the moment it's an annual survey. In the past it has been run actually on a quarterly basis, or twice a year, but at the moment it is once a year. And it provides data at practice and national level. And of course, because of that, because it's representative data at practice level, we can look at experiences at other geographies as well. And that means because of the way in which it's run, because we get that representative data, it's actually used by loads of different stakeholders for different purposes. So of course, it is used by NHS England at a national level to understand, it informs their policy, it measures their policy, it helps them understand how well different policies are working. It's also used at sort of sub-national level by ICSs, regions. It can be used at PCN level as well. And we really want it to be used at practice level. Of course, as you get down those geographies, the sample sizes are smaller. And that's something that I'm going to talk about in a moment, is talk about the sample sizes and what you can do with the results at each of those levels. So just some numbers, I'm going to pick out some key ones here for you. We invite over 2 million patients to take part in it each year. We get responses back representing over 6,000 practices. So it is designed to cover pretty much every practice. Sort of smaller practices don't get included if they're very small, if they're just about to close, that sort of thing. Last year, we had responses back from over 750,000 people. That's a response rate of 28.6%. And I'm going to talk about response rate more in a moment as well. Lots of people take part online, over 300,000. We get lots of calls to the helpline. Really importantly, we get over 6,000 people took part in a language other than English. And again, that's something that I'm going to pick up on it in a moment. So what does it do? What's it there for? Well, primarily it's there to provide insight into experiences of primary care. And the questionnaire, a huge amount goes into developing the questionnaire every year. So for example, we start each year, NHS England reach out to the different policy teams within NHSE, but they'll also reach out to different stakeholders. The steering group is a really important group there. So I said that it's got representatives of different bodies on there, and part of their role is to reach out to their networks and make sure that the questions are fit for purpose, that they are capturing the information that people need, that people want to be able to use. There's a real tension here, as you can imagine. This is a survey, as I said, it's now going into its 18th year. And one of the advantages of that is that you can track change over time, and that trend sort of measurement is really important to lots of people. But of course, that's no good if it doesn't actually reflect the reality of what's happening in primary care. So there's this real tension between preserving questions so that you can measure them over time, and actually updating the questionnaire every year to reflect the reality of what's happening and how patients are using services. And this year, we're actually going into quite a big redesign of it. So a big piece of work has been happening to try and reflect the different ways in which patients are accessing services mainly. So there's a number of different sorts of sections within the questionnaire that are likely to be used in this year, 2024. So first of all, it's just about practice services in general, the range of different services that are available at practices. And then last contact. So this section is one that's changed quite a lot, and it's trying to reflect the fact that patients are contacting their practices in very different ways now for lots of different purposes as well. It's not just about an appointment. But we do also have questions about that last appointment, so that last interaction between the patient and the healthcare professional. And again, we're trying to reflect the fact that we know that it's not patients don't always see a GP at their practice, and they don't need to, and they shouldn't want to. but it's quite hard because quite often they don't know who it is that they've actually seen. But we try to include a range of different healthcare professionals there. And then there are sections on what happens when your practice is closed, and pharmacy as well, so broadening it out so it's not just about GP services. The other important point about the questionnaire is that it captures lots of information about the patient themselves. So we know about the long-term conditions that they have, how well they're being managed. We ask about frailty. We understand which patients might be in that cohort. We know things about their caring responsibilities. We ask how many hours they provide care for somebody else. And for me, this is the real beauty of GPPS, actually, because I've mentioned that sample size. So we're getting 750,000 people at a national level. When you've got a sample size that is that big, you can really start to drill down into specific population groups. So in most surveys, you wouldn't be able to say anything with confidence about a very specific group, perhaps people with a certain condition or people who are carers, who have caring responsibilities. But this is something that I think is really valuable about the GP patient survey. So, for example, we've done a bit of work looking at the experience of carers compared with the experience of other people as well. And there's lots of different groups. We capture all the sort of normal demographics that you would expect. So you can really start to unpick some of those issues and really start to understand health inequalities. So how does it work? The first thing to say is there's a very strict sampling process. So we are aiming for at least 100 responses per practice. But most importantly is that it's a random probability approach. And that's what's one of its strengths. So using statistical theory, we can be certain about the fact that we are getting a representative sample of every practice that's included in the survey. We use the spine to select patients, and it's patients are eligible if they're age 16 or over and have been registered with their current practice for 6 months, for at least 6 months. The other important thing is that we then weight those responses. So first of all, we select patients that we know are representative of every practice. But then when we get the results back in, because we know about the population of each practice, we can weight those responses. We know that we get certain groups of people who are more likely to respond to surveys. We know, for example, older people tend to respond more than younger people do. So we can correct for that non-response bias. We use a regression model to correct for that. And then we also scale the results. So I talked about the practices being almost like a building block, so that we can be confident that they are making up the right proportion when you're looking at results, say at PCN level or ICS level or even national level. So of course, that 100 responses per practice, it's not huge. And I think we have to be clear about that. And I know that's one of the things that people often ask about the survey is, how can I be confident in the results? It's only 100 people from my practice. There's a number of things I'd say is, first of all, we know that it's representative. And I would use this data to contextualize some of the other data that you might be seeing from, say, your friends and family test or other qualitative, where we know that's not representative, it's more immediate. It might be more useful to you in that moment to make service improvements. But something like this that has the statistical rigor behind it, we can be certain. So we know that it's 100 patients that is representative of your practice, and we know what the confidence intervals are around that response. You'll know that, when we do a national survey, we aim for about 1,000 when we're doing our polling, our election polling. We aim for about 1,000 responses across the whole country, and that gives us a confidence interval of plus or minus 3 percentage points. So smaller samples do mean that those confidence intervals widen, but we have some idea of where that the actual result is. How do we invite people to take part? Well, it's a mix of postal and SMS reminders. We send out an initial invitation letter with a paper questionnaire, and that's followed by a text message, an SMS reminder to people who have a mobile phone number listed on the spine. We then repeat that a month later, and then a month later again. So there's 3 invitations, or sort of 1 invitation and 2 reminders, which is quite a lot. But it's really important because we know that the people that respond to that final reminder are very different from the people who respond to that first invitation. So if we want to reduce our non-response bias, if we want to really make sure it's as representative as possible, it's really important to hear from those people and send out multiple reminders. We also know that it's important to vary the messaging, so vary the contact method, but also vary the messaging, because it will appeal to different people in the population. And we use best practice principles, so trying to appeal to sort of use different motivation. And this is something we develop through qualitative work, and then we test with the public. So we cognitively test some of these messages that are used in the letters. And then we pilot them as well to see what response rate we get back. So, for example, usually something that's saying about this is your chance to help the NHS is really powerful. It works with a lot of people. But then with certain groups, we need to change that message, and we get better responses later on when we've changed that message. So as I said, people can take part on paper or online. They get sent the paper questionnaire, but we are trying to encourage more and more people to take part online because a number of reasons. Actually, it's cheaper because we don't have to print lots of stuff and we don't have to spend lots of money on postage. So it's more cost effective for the NHS. It's also more timely because you can imagine, can't you, when you have to post out the questionnaire, they have to post it back, you then have to scan it, you then have to clean the data, it just takes time. Whereas an online survey, you get that clean data immediately, so we can turn around results. So the more people we get online, the quicker we can publish those results. They can become more timely. And what's really important is when we are running a survey like this, and we've got paper and online, we need to make sure that the online survey is sort of optimized for the way in which people are going to respond to it. So of course, we know more and more people are doing things on their phone. So you can see on the right hand side here is the how we've optimized it to make sure it looks good on a phone, it looks visually appealing, and it's easy to use. There's nothing missing. So we have to put a lot of work into making sure it works on mobile phones. And we want to make it accessible. I talked about non-response bias, and this is one of the ways we can do that, is making sure that different people can take part. So the biggest way in which we do this is just making it available in other languages. So we make it available in 14 languages other than English, and we regularly review that to make sure that they are languages that that are used more. But there's also a telephone helpline as well, so people can get assistance if they need it in a language that's not actually on the online survey as well. And then we also make it available in British Sign Language, in large print and Braille. And on the online survey, as I said, we optimize it for the telephone screen, but what's really important is that it's screen reader accessible, and you can do things like change the font size and background color. So we've done a lot of work to make sure it really meets those accessibility guidelines, so that we are reducing or removing any barriers to taking part. So we're really trying to hear from as many different people as possible. The method does change sometimes and has done over time, and there's a number of different reasons we might change the method. It's either because we want to increase the response rate overall, or we want to reduce the non-response bias. And actually, that's a really important point, because I said we've got 28.6% response rate this year. Actually, the response rate almost doesn't matter. What matters is how representative it is. It's about the level of bias that's in that. We could increase that to 38%, but that might not actually make it more representative. What's really important is reducing that non-response bias, reducing the level of bias in the types of people taking part. So we do a lot of work to try and reduce that. And we know that response rates are declining across the industry. Just in society, people are less likely to take part in surveys now than they were 10 years ago. So we do whatever we can to sort of slow down that decrease, but also more importantly, to reduce the non-response bias. And alongside that, we try to encourage people to take part online for all the reasons I just said. And you can see that's been particularly successful over the last few years, partly because the world's changed and more people are doing more things online, but also because we've introduced lots of things to try and encourage them. So like the SMS reminders, that really improved the online response rate. And we are just about to introduce something this year as well, which is using an e-letter. So it's something that people on this call may be using for appointments. So it's a text message, but actually when you click on it, it's the full letter with all of the information in there. So again, that's that's trying to encourage people to take part online. And it's something that we experimented with in the previous year in 2023. And we saw more people taking part on overall, but also more people taking part online. So it was really encouraging. So we're going to implement that in the main survey this year. So a question that we often get asked is, why don't you just do it all online? That would be a lot cheaper and easier, wouldn't it? And the answer is yes, it would, but it would make it far less robust and reliable. The main thing is we just don't have email addresses and mobile phone numbers for everyone, because not everybody has them, and they're certainly not recorded on the spine as accurately as postal addresses. What we have for everyone is a good postal address. So we have to make that first contact through a letter. We also know that people are less likely to respond to online surveys, and the people who do respond online are different from the people who respond using paper, and that's really important. We want, as I said, it's about trying to encourage different types of people to take part, and we want to remove barriers to taking part. So some people, even if they're online, they would still prefer to take part on paper. So it's really important that we offer them that option. And one of the things we know, I talked about this e-letter, we know that if that came as the first invitation, if it was an electronic invitation, first of all, people don't tend to see it as legitimate. They need that paper message, first of all, to establish the legitimacy of the survey, and then they're more likely to take part online. So these are things that we're experimenting with every year to try and improve the response to the survey. So finally, how can you use the data? So there's a number of different ways. So it's if you wanted to look at results for particular organisations, so obviously practice, PCN, ICS level, the data is available at each of those levels. Analysing trends I mentioned, so where are there areas for improvement, or where are things getting better? Understanding the experience, this is the thing that I think GPPS is really, really valuable for, is understanding the experiences of specific groups because of that really large sample size. So how do you do that? So if you wanted to look at results for a particular organisation, whether that's a practice or an ICS, there's a number of different ways. There's an analysis tool on the website. So you can select questions and then select different practices or different PCNs or different ICSs to look at results by each of those. You can look in the ICS slide packs, which contain results for each ICS within the ICS and also comparing to others. There's Excel reports which list every question by every practice, and there's a PCN tool as well, reporting results at PCN level. If you want to look at trends, the easiest way at a national level are the charts in the national report. But if you want a bit more detail, there's the national results and trends. So that's got all of the responses each year. So you can look at the real detail of how things have changed. Again, the analysis tool, we can select questions and select sort of the time series, so you can look at trends over time. And the PCN tool also shows you that as well. And then finally, the health inequalities, like looking at the experience of different groups. So there are blogs on the website that we write to highlight different experiences. I talked about the one looking at experiences of carers, and we try to encourage other people to do that as well. There's also a national report, which this is really good at just breaking down the results at a national level for each of the individual sort of demographic groups that take part in the survey. And then finally, you can do exactly the same on the analysis tool if you wanted to do your own analysis of looking at certain questions by certain groups. So that was everything I wanted to say to give you an overview of everything related to the survey. So very interested to hear your questions.
Wow, just wow. You know, there are times you hear things and you have this veil of mystery on stuff. What a nice, easy way to have unpacked that and given the power back to us, Anna. Thank you. Thank you so much. And as you were talking, the screen's been abuzz with questions already, okay? People are just desperate to understand what's happening. And it was really helpful to unpack, because some of the questions you already answered were around how many different languages the effort is made to make this representative, the effort that's put into making sure the survey actually captures people with disabilities, just having Braille available for people, large print size available. It's phenomenal. And making it representative, I think throughout the theme that I captured was how much of effort goes into making it representative rather than just increase the numbers, which is less meaningful. So the question that pops in very quickly is, how do some special groups get captured, people with learning disabilities who have really come to the forefront in today's world, given the outcomes they had in the pandemic? Any views on that?
So one of the things I think we have to be aware of is that sometimes these national surveys aren't the best way of capturing data from very specific groups like that, because, I mean, you can, for example, we've developed easy read versions of the survey, but then you can't sort of include those results in the national results because the questions are different. And actually, I would argue, if that's a specific group that you're interested in, I don't think this is the survey that's going to do that, particularly for that group. I think for other groups, it is really valuable, but actually I would take something like this and try and explore it in a more qualitative way with that particular group, actually.
Fabulous. I think given your expertise in that area, it's really good to hear, because it's a question that's been posed not in the Q&A, but in the chat session by a colleague who I enormously respect, because she is quite a force to work with. And you know, when you say that, it also brings to life the fact that using this fabulous tool has to be done in a sensitive way, so that using this tool in conjunction with the other tools that are available to us, rather than exclusively imagining one answer to be the answer to everything in life.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think, and one of the things that's coming out is general practice is changing. So the modern general practice is very different from the gym. And I've been a doctor for 33 years now, and what I was trained to do is not what I do. And colleagues in general practice would recognize this with absolute ease. So the question is about a survey that's been going on for 18 years. What's done so that it is adapted to what's a modern general practice and what people want? What do you do for that?
So, as I mentioned, we've undergone quite a lot of development for this year's questionnaire precisely because of that. So trying to capture the different routes into general practice now for patients. So one of the, the starting point is, what's the policy, first of all, because NHS England is the client, and we need to use that as a starting point. But then, as I said, it's reaching out to stakeholders via the steering group. So hearing from different stakeholders about what happens in reality. This is what's happening in this practice over here. This is what's happening over here. Then making sure that we can develop questions that actually accurately sort of represent what's happening in modern general practice, but in a way that is comparable, because it can't take account of every single practice and what they do that's slightly different. So it needs to be sort of common enough that it's not that it can be used across all practices, but that it's sensitive enough to pick up the different ways. And then we do work with patients and the public as well, because just because we think we've drafted a question that captures the different ways in which you might contact your practice now and different ways in which you might receive a response, that doesn't mean that people understand it in the way that we think we do. So that's why we do cognitive testing, and we do multiple rounds of it. So we'll talk, and when I say cognitive testing, we recruit members of the public who may also covering different demographics as well, different long-term conditions, who are across different areas in the country as well. And we test the questions with them, and then we take those results, think actually that question doesn't work at all, they didn't understand it, or they understood it differently, redraft the question and then test it again and again. And it's something that I think we're going to have to keep doing, because primary care isn't standing still, is it? So it's something that I think we have to keep checking in every time to make sure that the questions are actually reflecting what's happening.
I think it's really strong what you pulled out in that question, because I think it's quite interesting to see how the changing nature of general practice is something the questionnaire needs to keep pace with.
Yeah.
Now, I'll declare an interest to our colleagues today. I am on the national group for the stakeholders who feed back onto the new questions. And I have seen firsthand the amount of effort that goes into ensuring different sectors of stakeholders have a representative say in it, from service users, patients, carers, and each is considered differently, along with GPs and the national bodies like the BMA coming in have a view. But that doesn't take away what the LMC view might be, or what the GP direct view will be. And it's such an interesting meeting, because I go for it on a regular basis, and I know you share it. But it is just one of those absolutely fabulous meetings that gives you a lot of comfort when you come back from it, to say, this would take into account a number of facets of what we would all like to see in it. I think the challenge, though, at general practice, and that's the bit that I know you'll probably be grappling with already, is general practice is actually a mirror of everything else in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So how the local authority functions, how housing functions, how education functions, how easy it is to be able to find a job in that society, how the ICS is doing. I mean, acute trust is not doing well, it's back on general practice, and people don't distinguish quite that sensitively to say, this is my GP's remit of functioning, and the rest is actually an acute trust or the housing issue. So how do you balance the outcome that comes for a general practice from an area like Blackburn, where the needs are really high, versus an area like Chelsea, which is different? So I work in the east of London, and the needs are very different. You can feel those needs. I mean, I work in Luton. The needs are really different for that group. So a survey would be able to tell us on a representative sample what the general feedback from that group of patients was. But how do you then compare yourself in an equitable way to practices that are in very different demographics?
And one of the things that we see every year, although we say don't do this, we see local newspapers publishing league tables of practices in the area. And that is not how it should be used. It is representative of each practice, because we put a lot of work into selecting the patients so they're representative and then weighting the data. But actually, what that means is you will get different results if you have a different population. And we see that the variation is huge from one bit of the country to the other. And that's largely because of the populations that are being served. It's not just about what the practice is doing. So I'd say one of the things that we can use GPPS for, because of the large sample size, is to try and understand the differences for those different populations. We did a piece of work many years ago looking, this is how long ago it was looking at PCT results in the Healthcare Commission survey. But one of the things we found, we wanted to look at what are the factors that really affect ratings that they get, that different areas get. And for primary care, it was less about what the primary care team did. It was more about the makeup of the local population and how challenging it was. So we found one of the biggest things was the ethnic fractionalization of the population being served. So it wasn't just about did it have a lot of people from an ethnic minority group. It was specifically about the range of different groups that were in an area. And lots of people on this call will probably be able to talk about why that is, because it's much harder to meet the needs of a really diverse set of people than it is to meet the needs of one very homogenous group of people. So that's absolutely why you can't compare one practice with another unless their populations are exactly the same. We're repeating that work in a similar way. So I would urge people to have a look at sort of that, and I would also, rather than, because I think sometimes we hear from people, practices saying, but my results are worse than a practice down the road because of my population, so that doesn't help me at all. But actually, there is something about looking at the population served. So you can look at the national data and understand, well, how do experiences differ for these different population groups, that then, although it's only 100 responses perhaps for your practice, you can then use that to understand what do I need to know. I know what, everybody on here will know what their population is, but they can use the national results, thinking about those different population groups, to think what that means for their results. And I would encourage it. It's not a league table at all. It's about understanding how experiences differ, but there are lots of different reasons why those experiences differ, or the rating, or the recording of the experience differs.
So I think my takeaway message, and I'm going to paraphrase this, Anna, but do correct me, please, is the real strength of this survey is actually being able to compare your own practice from what the outcome last year was compared to the next year, because that's the most likely homogeneous population that you're comparing yourself to year on year. It also, as clinicians, gives us the power to make change to certain aspects of our practice working so that we can improve the experience our patients have from the services we provide to them. I think the key part of this takeaway is, please don't start using this to compare yourself to the next practice, because the very fact that they have a different set of people is different. The part that really did catch on to me was when Anna spoke about the comparison tool that's available. So use the tool to pick up a practice that's similar to yours, rather than just pick up what's happening in your PCN or the wider area, because the very fact that you have a different population will make your outcome different from others. So this is a powerful tool for us to improve the care we provide to our residents. It is not a tool for us to create league tables. Practice X is better than practice Y, because actually they're comparing apple to pears. So please don't take that. And I think it's also a strong takeaway message for commissioners and for others, because the key challenge is comparing oneself to last year's performance versus this year to say, am I on a trajectory that's improving care? And are my patients feeling the same? So I think it was really helpful having someone with your expert understanding of this unpack that for us. Because I remember 15 years ago looking at practice X and Y without once thinking the demographics, the ethnic makeup, the homogeneity of the population was fundamentally different in those two areas. And it becomes meaningless then at that point. I think one of the good things, the questions people have raised is, do people ask you when they come across to say, is my contribution making a difference? Will someone actually impact this?
So that's one of the reasons I talked about the different messages that we use in the letters to encourage people to take part. And one of the things that people tell us is they want to take part because they want their voice to be heard and because they want it to make a difference. The challenge, of course, is that, the results are published and they're just out there. It's for other people to go and make a difference. I don't necessarily know how. I mean, I hear anecdotally, I heard one practice looked at their results and they actually implemented, well, before it was being talked about at the moment, sort of changed their telephone system so that people could contact them in a different way, and they saw their results improve the following year. So I know that some practices have gone and really used the survey results to be able to implement change, but of course yeah, I don't know what's happening at a local level once those results are out there. I suppose what I do know is that national policy changes as a result of it, because we can see that and we know that that's the way in which it's used. But I'd also say, picking up your point earlier about, yes, this is about comparing yourself with last year's self, but it's also about looking at, you know, where is this practice particularly strong, and you know, where are your strengths and weaknesses comparatively within the one set of results. And that's quite useful. And that's where, you know, when I have heard practices that have used it and have made a difference, it's because they've looked at where are their results actually really poor and where are their results really strong.
I think you're spot on when you say that. I think this is a tool that each person has to intelligently interpret and use in a way that's genuinely meaningful to improving care, rather than get caught in the system of I'm on a league table that shows I'm below someone else. And I think in the changing general practice, many practices rightfully are using care navigation. So you're navigated to your pharmacist, you're navigated to the pharmacy, you're navigated to other community organizations for social prescribing, because actually it's the right thing. I'm a doctor, and I can assure you there are so many things that people come to me for, which I'd look rather blankly and say they're colleagues who know it much better than I do. So I think, how does the survey pick that part up? Because the interaction may well not be with the practice at all.
Yeah.
But it is still a practice's responsibility to make sure it's the right interaction, isn't it? Or am I missing the point there, Anna?
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things we've really struggled with actually in developing the questionnaire, is just the range of things that general practice does. And you know, sometimes the patient will get an outcome then and there, won't they, with the person that they see, but it might be that actually that's just the start of a very long journey. And so it's really hard to separate out the patient's view of their experience of the practice when it's, you know, maybe it's a gatekeeper to other services, maybe it's a navigation tool to other services, maybe it does solve the problem then and there. And it's really hard, but we one of the things we've been doing in the development of this year's survey is that splitting out last contact and last appointment. So trying to understand actually why did you contact your practice the last time you made contact? Was it for, and we've got the long list of things that it could be for. And then how was that resolved, or how did you, you know, were you told that somebody would contact you? Were you referred on somewhere? So we're trying to unpick actually what happened, and then did that meet your needs? It's a really tricky one. So that's something that I think we are starting to get a handle on now.
And I think it is a tricky one, and these are things you've got to trial and error. I think the other thing that people often talk about in this survey is, you know, how it's a randomized selection of patients, population, registered list size from the spine, and you make this random selection. But often, colleagues that I've spoken to speak about the fact that the patient who's asked to do the survey hasn't had contact with my practice for 2 years or 4 years and 3 years. How does one manage to ensure that the ones who have in the last year or 18 months had contact are the ones who really get selected, because they're the ones most likely to be able to be the sounding bell of what's really happening on the ground, rather than having ancient history of, you know, 6 years ago, no one listened to me and my mom died away. Horrible experience. And I can never say there's any way to get out of that.
Yeah.
But it's just not representative of what's today the practice is doing. Views on...
So one of the features of GPPS is actually it selects the eligible patients are just people who are registered with that practice. So you may well invite somebody who hasn't used their practice for quite a long time. But they are important, because is there a reason they haven't accessed their practice? And it's because they've got a negative perception of it, or last time they tried to phone, they can, you know, all of those things. So we do want to hear from those people. However, we then go on to ask about last contact, last appointment, and when they were. So we'll say, in the last 12 months when you had this last appointment, and we can start to filter out people, and we report on that level as well. So we know this person has an appointment in the last 3 months, and you can break down the results. So I talked about using the analysis tool. For example, that's something you can do. So people who have used it more recently, have they got a different experience from people who used it longer ago? Because I agree that's really, really important.
I think that is brilliant, because it kind of gives colleagues on the call today the assurance that it isn't just the fact that they have had no contact over the last few years. That data is picked up in a way so we are able to use it the right way for everyone else. I think that there is a recognition that, and I think I do this too. We're not very good as a group of people to put in the effort when things go well. But when they don't go well, we do put in the effort to raise a complaint, ensure we fill in this survey.
Yeah.
We are genuinely dissatisfied. And it is right. I think the question then is, do you think that's the general way it turns up? Or do you think actually the statistics show that it does average out and you don't only end up with the dissatisfied people talking about you?
Yeah, and I think that's why we use the random probability approach, and why we put so much effort into trying to get people to respond, because we don't want to hear from people who've had either a really good experience, only a really good experience, or only a really bad experience. We want to hear from everybody who has been registered and used that practice. And that's one of the things that I think we get more of in GPPS, actually, because we can be more confident about it. I think things like friends and family test, or complaints data, you're only going to hear from people who are very motivated to tell you if you don't do something where you are reaching out to a representative sample. And you only have to look at the results to know that we're getting a real range. So one of the things that's really stood out for me over the last few years of GPPS, is looking at the national results, is that we have seen people's experience of accessing services decline very slowly over time. Yet what we haven't seen decline at all like that is their ratings of the individual interaction with the healthcare professional. And we think, that's still over 9 in 10 people rating it as very good. Things like, did they listen to you? Did they give you enough time? Were your needs met? These results are still staying incredibly high. Those are really strong results. So I think, but we are starting to see some people saying, well, I can't get an appointment when I want it. But we are getting that sort of full range of experience. So I'm confident that we are hearing not just from the very happy and the very unhappy. We are hearing from that representative sample.
Thank you. And I think you're spot on. I think the effort you put into that really comes to the forefront when you talk about it. And it's so helpful, because many colleagues would always go back thinking, there's nothing I can do about my survey. Actually, people are only going to complain because only they are the ones who come across to us. But that's not a fact. The fact is, you do put in the effort to get a representative sample. You do put in the effort. So I think it is still in our hands to make a change. It's a slow process. It's painstaking. Don't compare yourself to your colleagues. Instead, compare yourself to your last year, because that's the best comparator you will have. Or put in the effort to look at a general population that is similar to yours, and compare to that practice. And I think just for colleagues who are online today, and for those who usually tend to see this on the reruns, because we are live today on a number of platforms, and I'm told we are live streams. I'm too old to understand what that means, but I'm going to smile and act like I understand what that means. So I think for those colleagues, the number of questions you're posing, many of them I'm not going to pick up, because they are actually questions Anna has answered. So questions around holding 2 contracts and still having different outcomes and running the same model. well, then it depends completely on the demographic makeup of the two contracts, because you could have very different expectations from different demographic makeups. And Anna has been talking eloquently about that. There are questions being asked about, should we be using other samples, other ways of surveying patients? Please do, because Anna started talking by around, this used to happen 4 times in a year, it went to 2 times in a year, now it's once in a year. But if you have specialist groups, you want to understand their needs, you just need to run your own sample. There is nothing that stops you from asking questions, even after every consultation from the patient. You're right about survey fatigue, but please recall when Anna started her conversation, you're not expecting everyone to answer. 2.6 million invitations, just 750,000 who respond, and you have a 28% response rate for that sample, and it's representative. So what matters is making sure your sample size is representative of the answers it gives you. Please don't run surveys and expect everyone to be answering the question. I think the question, couple of questions being asked about inequalities, Anna, in a wide variety of ways, and it has come to the forefront in a big way, inequalities with the COVID pandemic, even the way disease conditions affect people, the way the treatment care runs. We talk about waiting list as a homogeneous group, but actually the evidence has shown people who are from ethnic minorities tend to have a longer waiting list for exactly the same condition than others. And one can give any number of reasons, and I'm sure they are all the right reasons, but they are never the right answers. You can have any amount of reasons. So the question I'm going to ask is, you spoke initially about the reducing number of response rates over time, which is a common occurrence. Do you also have some intelligence around, is that reduction proportionate in an ethnic minority and hard to reach groups, or is it just a single homogeneous figure without the breakdown of what's happening? And if so, what are we doing for those hard to reach groups?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And that's the crux of it, isn't it? It's, we want to make sure that 28% of people that they really are representative. So what we can do is we can look, because we don't, to explain how the sampling is done, there's certain information that we know about the registered population, which is age, gender, and which practice. We don't know their ethnicity when we select them to take part, but because it's randomized, it should fall out. And then if we weight it properly, it should fall out. But then we do some other checks. So things like looking at the numbers we have, whether that's languages being chosen or what they tell us in the survey about their ethnic group, or other things that they tell us about themselves. And then we try and compare that to what information we do have on the latest information on the census. So when we have done that, we've been encouraged that we are getting representative groups of those people, and we're not seeing sort of a decline in any one particular group, but actually it is across the board. And actually what we've done by trying to encourage more people online, we are starting to see other people come into the survey that wouldn't normally take part in the survey as well. So we're starting to see it improve in certain groups. But that's something we've just got to keep monitoring it, because I think that would be something we would worry about if we were starting to see a particular fall off in a particular ethnic minority group or any demographic group. But that's something that we look at really carefully, and we need to keep doing that every year.
And I think it's amazing how the hour has flown. You know, time travels fast when you're enjoying the hour, and it's been an absolute fun hour with you. I think in a world where clinicians and clinical groups work extremely hard nowadays, they really do. And the one thing, despite the hard work, that makes the day bright is when you can sit back at the end of the day and feel you made a difference to the lives of people. And the true measure of recognizing as a clinician and a clinical group that you made a difference is the patient feedback survey. And it's really interesting how you have demystified something that has been cloaked and shrouded in so much of mystery, and you made it sound so simple and made it so easy to understand how it is meaningful, representative, does all the right things, And today's seminar will always be remembered for those fabulous figures of equity, making sure you have a representative sample, ensuring that the amount that goes in, the amount of effort that you put in as a team to make sure we have the right data so that it's meaningful and it's comparable, but also the understanding that we have to use that data intelligently rather than just publish elite tables, which becomes meaningless and makes a mockery of all the hard work. So Anna, a big thank you to you from the bottom of my heart for the fabulous, fabulous hour that I've spent today understanding with you and the colleagues. For colleagues online, our next session is on the 18th of October at 7 p.m. And our guest then will be Sheila Neogi, who is from Pimlico Health. You may remember they have done some amazing work in redefining what a community of care can be and how the face of primary care can be very, very different. Please do take a moment to fill out the feedback form that would have been very capably put up by Sarah and Lisa, and do feedback on how the session went. Did you enjoy it? What would you like to see us change? I mean, if I've learned anything from Anna, the more the feedback I have that's representative, the better our sessions would be going ahead. Also, a very, very big thank you to Sarah and Lucy, who in the background make this all look really wonderful, but I promise you, I have no clue what to do if it wasn't for the two of them telling me what needs to be done. So, wishing you all a fabulous, fabulous evening. Anna, thank you so much for what you've done today. You have made this such a fabulous evening for us. For some reason, the slide deck on the screen seems to show a thank you slide rather than a slide, but I'm sure that's what Sarah means to show. So, colleagues, we'll start closing up. Anna, if you'll hold on for a minute, just so I
of course. Thank you very much, everybody.